from 1990s, and it has taken 25 years, and there will be explosion of this model. It was a concept which was seen in animals just to see whether if you have a hyperglycemia by excreting the glucose, whether you can bring down the blood sugar. So from that we have come a long way. So this is what initially, long back, what Aretas Kaposia, he said diabetes is a remarkable affliction, not very frequent among men, which is already wrong. The cause is the common one, namely kidneys and the bladder. For the patient never stops making water, but the flow is incessant, as if from the opening of a current. This is just as an observation study. He thought the disease is mainly in the bladder and the kidney, and nobody knew about pancreas and its role in that. So we have so many drugs today. If you look at it, you have sulfonylureas, which is hypoglycemia and weight gain. Insulin is for hypoglycemia, weight gain. Triazolidines, weight gains, edema, fractures, even in men concerned about bladder cancer. And DPP-4 inhibitors, which are weight neutral, low hypoglycemia. GLP-1 are not weight loss, no hypoglycemia, but injectable one. Everybody agrees all the guidelines, whether it is EAST, ADA, IDF, NICE guidelines, name anything, it is very clear that metformin is the first line of drug. What is the next line of drug? You have got 9 or 10 or 11 choices essentially. How to choose the second one, and on what basis you will choose the second one. Though you have got all this, I have listed only about 5 of them. Again, if you look at the hazard ratio, recently there is a beautiful paper, 14 years follow-up of the patients in the Sweden registry of 5,000 and odd to see what happens to the hazard ratio for cardiovascular. It has got lot of other aspects, regulation of ionic composition of blood, maintains blood pressure, as you know, blood glucose level, maintains the pH, and it's also an endocrine organ, which all the endocrinologists know how erythropoietin and calcitriol are very important for the body. So this is how, I don't want to go into the details which the normal physiology shows, how you see when there is a cardiac output, and you see that all the functions of the kidney are related to it, and at various stages, whether it is an afferent arterial, then the glomerulus, proximal cannulated tubule, loop of Henle, collecting duct, how all of them are involved in the water balance and such. And this is what we want to see. If you see in the glucose excretion, 90% is reabsorbed from the first segment of proximal tubule, and from the distal, the another 10%, almost 90 to 99 to 100% is absorbed, and then hardly any glucose goes. And there is one SGLT2 which is responsible for it, these receptors. So how can we block this SGLT2 receptor and see a person excrete this glucose, so blood sugar comes down? You don't have to bother the underlying cause. This is what all of you know, the mechanism, how that sodium gets in, and then the glucose also gets in, then through the blood, the glucose is absorbed to the blood through this, this is reabsorption of the glucose. Then this sodium ATP is pumped, that sodium is exchanged to the potassium, This is the physiology all of us know. So how does kidney contributing to the glucose homeostasis? We said liver, we know pancreas, and we know gut, we know muscle, but this is one thing which was looked into critically last 25 years. Production of glucose, utilization of glucose, of course like any other organ, reabsorption of glucose from the filtrate. This is the most important aspect, physiological function of the kidney. And then say what abnormality occurs in a person with diabetes, and is there anything at the receptor level or anything at the tubular level, and by making this rearrangement so that we can see that the blood sugar comes. That is the concept with which it was started. As you know, both liver as well as kidney contribute to the glucose production. Gluconeogenesis 20 to 25% occurs in the kidney, and you see gluconeogenesis 25 to 30% occurs in liver, and glucogenolysis, again why we say metformin, hepatic glucose output, nearly 50% is contributed from the liver. All of them produce almost 70 grams of glucose per day in a normal person. If you see the total glucose in the body as 450 grams, utilization by various organs, then how much comes from the diet, and what is it that what I showed you from liver and kidney, it's about 70 grams. Renal glucose filtration reabsorption 180 grams. That means you excrete 180 grams and reabsorb 180 grams. Can we see that 160 grams is excreted, 100 grams is excreted, the burden of this hyperglycemia comes down. So in this pool, glucose filtered is 180 grams, reabsorbed is 180 grams. So what we intend to do is see that the excretion is much more, and then we can alter this physiology. This is what I told you, how the renal handling of the glucose, which I already showed, that normally minimal glucose is excreted from the body. Now, what is the rationale for this SGLT2 inhibition, which I showed you in the previous slide, how the SGLT2 works here and whether we can inhibit and excrete it. Now, as you know, there are two. We are not much interested in the GLUT family. We are interested in the SGLT2 family. As you know, there are 6 members, SGLT1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Active unidirectional transport and sodium glucose co-transporters, and SGLT1 is in the brush border small intestine. There are a lot of work which is going on. SGLT1 inhibitors, which inhibit this glucose, which is a molecule which will be useful in obesity as such. Then our interest is SGLT2 from the proximal tubules, and then see whether inhibiting this, the glucose absorption, reabsorption can be reduced. So these are all the molecules, SGLT1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but our interest is mainly in the kidney as co-transporter sodium and glucose in S1 segment of the proximal tubule of the kidney. Let us not get into other things. That's not our interest. SGLT2 is also not a part of today's discussion because the indications are different, drugs are different, and it's a big thing which will come probably in obesity, maybe in prevention of diabetes rather than anything else. This is what I told you, where the SGLT2 receptors are responsible for glucose reabsorption. Suppose we partially or completely block these receptors, then whether we can have more and more of this excretion. This is the basis of SGLT2 inhibitors, and which causes increased glucose excretion as such in a patient, reduces hyperglycemia. So SGLT1, SGLT2 receptors are distributed all over the body, as you can see, in the intestine, kidney. That's where you see SGLT1, and kidneys predominantly have SGLT2 receptors, sugar capacity, glucose phases, and you will see that constant, very high affinity for the glucose as such. And this is what I already showed you, how from the lumen, the sodium as well as glucose reabsorption and getting into the blood. Now, this is what I'm trying to say. Suppose these are the healthy patients, then type 2 diabetes patients as such, and if you see the GLUT2 as well as SGLT2, and this is what you see, transporter protein excretion and uptake into tubal epithelial cells. Compared to healthy patients, type 2 diabetes have this abnormality of glucose transport. That means these SGLT2 inhibitors or SGLT2 receptors are more active, so more and more glucose is reabsorbed in there. This is the basis of the one. Again, if you see SGLT1 and SGLT2, the lean and obese as such, as you can see, the receptor activity in SGLT1 and SGLT2 is higher in the obese compared to the lean Zucker rats. So this is the basis which was taken, and right from first MBBS all of us know that there is a threshold for glucose in the kidney, and that threshold is usually around 180. Glucose filtration rate normally proportional to plasma glucose. Anything more than 180, we will see that the body cannot have this glucose reabsorption, gets excreted in that, and this is the curve what is excreted, reabsorbed, and there is a transport maximum that is known as Tm of 600 when the blood sugar is like that. So what we need to see is continued glucose reabsorption even at high glucose level induces sustained hyperglycemia. Let us say in a normal person it never goes above 180, so you excrete 180 grams of glucose, reabsorbed all of that. But what happens unfortunately, when the blood sugar goes above 100, 200, 300, 400, the SGLT2 are still active and more glucose is reabsorbed, contributes to hyperglycemia as such. So once you see saturation threatened, how to block these SGLT2 receptors, and for this you have a human model as such. I am sure all of you have seen that a patient is referred urine glucose 3+, and this patient has no symptoms, and the patient is referred to maybe a girl of 12, 18, 20, when you check blood sugar 75, 80 or 90. So you see this is what is known as renal glycosuria. A healthy 15-year-old child was assessed together with her parents for immigration medical. All findings unremarkable. Part of routine medical exam, urine deep slick was done. It shows 3+ glucose, although all other substances including ketones are absent. Blood glucose level is 7. Right from undergraduate days we have seen. Meaning that in the human beings there is a model where you will see that SGLT2 is inhibited because maybe SGLT2 receptors are absent, maybe it's a genetic one. Now what happens to these people when they followed up 10, 20, 30, 40 years? Will they develop more diabetes? Will they develop more renal failure? Or they are asymptomatic and their lifespan is as good as anything, and these people never develop any cardiovascular mortality. Or they don't have any complaints at all, meaning that even if they have renal glycosuria, it's not going to affect the renal function as such, and they are hale and healthy. It's an incidental finding. There is nothing that we are going to do further. So fortunately, there is an animal model in nature which has already created either an absence or inefficient SGLT2 receptor. So taking lessons from this, these are two types of familial renal glycosuria, type A and type B. In type A, reduced amount of normal SGLT2 protein, and type 2, reduced affinity of SGLT2 receptors for glucose. Just like insulin, what you say, either there is decreased beta cell or there is decreased sensitivity to insulin or whatever it is. So or either insufficient insulin or ineffective insulin. Same way you can have this model where type A and type B familial glycosuria. So familial glycosuria, they may have glycosuria anywhere between 1 to 170 grams of glucose per day, asymptomatic. Blood normal glucose, no hypoglycemia, no hypovolemia, and kidneys no tubular dysfunction, normal histology, biopsies have been done. Complication, no chronic kidney disease, no diabetes, no urinary. Meaning that this, whatever the genetic model in the human being is safe. If we can attain it in a person with blocking this SGLT2, probably we can use this model to attain lowering the blood sugar. So these are the potential benefits. I don't want to go into details. Glucose lowering, insulin independent mechanism. Most of the other one, either they work on the beta cell, alpha cells, or they work on the insulin sensitivity, hepatic glucose output. It does not. Here is a mechanism, insulin independent one. Osmotic diuresis, initial weight loss, which is an advantage for a obese type 2, decrease in blood pressure, because when the volume comes down, loss of excess of calorie in the urine. Somebody is obese. Suppose he loses 100, 150 grams of glucose, naturally the weight has to come down. This is theoretical basis of it. So this is the rationale for SGLT2 inhibitors, inhibits glucose reabsorption in the renal proximal tubule. Resultant glycosuria leads to a decline in plasma glucose and reversal of glucotoxicity. All these studies have shown whatever your mechanism, if you bring down 400 to 300, 300 to 200, 200 to 100, the glucose toxicity comes down and the beta cell starts producing. We have seen empty number. Last week I saw a 14-year-old girl. For 1 year she was on insulin. I put her on 3 doses, and from March 2013 to September it went on going to hypoglycemia. I stopped insulin from October 2013 to July 2014. She is off insulin and blood sugar 70, 80. I said, start taking normal diet. Let me see what happens 3 months later. Whether it's a honeymoon phase, whether it is MODY, whether glucotoxicity, all these things, it does work that reducing blood sugar and reduces glucose oxidation, improves the beta cell function. This therapy is simple and non-specific. You don't have to worry about anything. Even patients with refractory to type 2 diabetes are likely to respond. Even if you go one step ahead, this is an oral which is an oral drug which can be used even in type 1 diabetic. Studies are going on. So before I conclude, that I don't want to talk about molecules, but these are the molecules which are on the pipeline. Today we don't have. I think the end of this year, beginning of next year, we will have these things: dapagliflozin, canagliflozin, empagliflozin, and epagliflozin. I have done studies for all these three, and we have already published 2 papers, likely to have 2 more papers on these things, which are there in the IDF-1. Hopefully they will get accepted, and hopefully by year end, definitely these drugs will be in the market for you to use. Thank you for your patient hearing, and if there are any questions on this aspect, I'll be very happy to take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prasanna Kumar. Now this topic is open for discussion, and the moderators are here to answer your queries, and the audience are welcome. Mic, please. Dr. Ramanathan from Madurai.
This SGL2 is a sodium glucose co-transporter. So what about the electrical abnormalities? It's supposed to produce hyponatremia and hyperkalemia and also.
Theoretically, you're absolutely correct that it causes diuresis, and therefore there should be some electrolyte imbalance. But in the clinical trials that have been published, there is no such evidence of dyselectrolytemia following the use of SGLT2 inhibitors.
What about the change in osmolality, sir?
Yeah,
because
same
glucose
thing.
and sodium both are responsible for the osmolality of the patient.
As he said, clinical studies have not shown. This is again because of the escape phenomenon.
You were asking about calcium?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, hematocrit increases. As we know that if you use SGLT2 inhibitor, hematocrit will increase. The same like a diuretics. The one thing, I will come back to the sodium issues that in clinical trials as a monotherapy, SGLT2 inhibitor has not caused hyponatremia. But then in a diabetic patients, those who are getting, number of medicines like diuretics, one has to be very careful. Then if you add diuretics with the SGLT2 inhibitor, then there is a possibility of hyponatremia.
What about the use in patients with CKD, nephropathy and also?
Nephropathy.
Diabetic
Yeah.
nephropathy.
Yeah, so because this molecule is acting through kidney, so it is, it's a common sense that this medicine will not work in a patient who had a kidney disease. But then we have these SGLT2 inhibitor which works up to EGFR of 30. For example, empagliflozin, that works, a study has shown that even it works up to EGFR 30. For Cana, it is up to 45. For DEPA, it is about 60. So above 60, it will definitely work. But less than 60, then you have to choose between which SGLT2 is working.
There are 2 things. One is, as you said, is it safe? Because renal safety is another thing. Is it safe to use it in patient with mild to moderate? As Dr. Avdesh Singh said, there are already studies which I don't want to show here, that mild to moderate renal failure, EGFR of even 60 also, at this point, it does not worsen the renal failure. 1. 2, it is still effective even in that stage. But if you have a severe end-stage renal disease, as you know, filtration is affected, it's not effective.
What about urinary tract infections, sir? We still have a doubt that whether it will increase the urinary tract infections and also.
Yeah, so the data suggests that there is increased urogenital infections with the use of SGLT2 inhibitor. See, the same happened with the gliptins. If you remember, before 2011, if you see all the meta-analysis, they suggested there's increased nasopharyngitis, they had an increased UTI. Same is happening with the SGLT2 inhibitor, and it's a common sense because your patient is excreting glucose, so there is always a possibility of genitourinary infections. But these are mild in nature. The trial and the report suggests that these are mild in nature. Even one course of antibiotic or antifungal drug is enough. It doesn't cause a recurrent, urogenital infections.
And as clinicians, we are probably more worried about upper urinary tract infections because those are the ones which are more difficult to treat and manage. Those tend to happen less. Whatever Dr. Singh was pointing about is more of the lower infections and more of the fungal infections. But we were discussing, like sir was saying, there are trials which are going to be published from India itself, sir has been part of it, where in spite of our concerns about, our tropical climate, our worries about more fungal infection and more lower urinary tract infection.
Especially ladies,
Yes,
especially in our countries,
particularly in women,
tract is
that
more.
has not been shown to the great extent that we are apprehending.
Thank you, sir.
All these, I have done all, canagliflozin, empagliflozin, dapagliflozin. All these studies have shown, even the phase 2 and phase 3, compared to placebo, urinary tract infection, genital tract infection, much higher in these drugs compared to others as expected. Don't think it is less. In fact, some studies have shown as high as 40 to 65% increased incidence of urinogenital. That is one thing one has to be careful. As you said, it's a very important thing that before you put down the drug, you should make sure patient does not have already a urogenital infection, which is probably going to worsen also.
Dr. Muralidharan from Chandigarh. It's a very nice presentation, Dr. Prasanna Kumar. There are some reports, and it is intuitive to expect also that once you are causing renal glucose wastage, as a compensation, there should be increase in hepatic glucose output. So what is your take on that, and whether that will cause an escape phenomenon in the long run, and we may have resistance to even these group of drugs? Because till now we have thought that at any stage of disease this will work because it is just causing glucose wastage. But if the body tries to compensate by increasing hepatic glucose output, will it nullify the effect of the drug?
So, thank you, sir, for your question. And if you see, there are two major trials which have been, at least the data have been presented with regards to increase in hepatic glucose output to the tune of almost 50% higher than what the baseline hepatic glucose output is. And that does offset some of the benefit of the SGLT2 inhibitors. But still, if you look at something like a 0.9% HbA1c, in spite of offsetting of this effect is still there. And if I look at it from an optimist's point of view, if I combine, say for example, a drug like metformin or a DPP-4 inhibitor, and say for example, particularly metformin, and suppress the hepatic glucose output, then if you look at the HbA1c reductions with metformin plus say an SGLT2, the benefit crosses 2% HbA1c. So your point very well taken, sir, that it does offshoot the benefit to some extent, but when you then combine it with something else, the effects are even more pronounced effect of the SGLT2 inhibitor.
Yeah, just I would add to that. So it's a very good questions that we know that if you use SGLT2 inhibitor for a prolonged use, then it will exaggerate the hepatic glucose production. But then if we use as a monotherapy, then there is issue, because we are not going to use this drug as a first line drug. Naturally, patients will be getting metformin, and whatever concern which we have with relative, loosening in effectiveness with increased hepatic glucose output is predominantly happening because of increased glucagon to insulin ratio. So if we add a metformin, which directly inhibits the hepatic gluconeogenesis, and if we give a incretin-based therapy, which will decrease the glucagon, then this issue probably will not look at it. Then somebody will argue that then this drug would be a third-line drug. So metformin is there. After that, maybe one can go for SGLT2 or gliptins, depending upon your choice.
What you said is very important. One is durability of the drug. Today we asked about it. Next thing is which all stages of diabetes. Though we have only the subset analysis to see that diabetics less than 1 year, diabetics 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whether this drug is effective. Next thing is durable. At least what we have now both with CANA as well as the DAPA is 2 years, 108 to even 160 weeks of that, 2 to 3 years study. It showed even at the end of 2 to 3 years also, the HbA1c reduction continues to be so when combined with metformin as such. So there is no such escape phenomena where hepatic glucose output overtakes this and then off balances that. But if you ask me beyond 3 years, is it say 3, 4, 5, 6, as far as I have seen, I have not seen any data about it. Maybe we should be careful to look at 5 years, 10 years to say safety.
There is one data last year published by Mike and Locke. I mean, it's not published yet, but it was presented in ESD Barcelona. That is the 4-year data of glipizide versus dapagliflozin by Michael Nock and group. This data suggested that there is, reducing in the effectiveness, because if you see the initial 1 year study, the HbA1c lowering, and after 4 years, it is getting reduced. The tune of HbA1c reduction is getting reduced. But then if you compare with the sulfonylurea, there is no match. So in 1 year, there was 0.5 reductions, but at the end of 4 years, it came down to 0.2. So there is a loosening in the effectiveness, but it is still maintaining if you compare with the existing drug.
Sorry, I missed the initial part of the lecture. And there's urinary tract infections. How serious are they in the trials? Like minimal UTI, small, or up to pyelonephritis? What kind of infections are they?
We discussed about that just before that. So as he mentioned that upper, urinary tract infections are, fortunately minimal or nil, you can say. The lower genitourinary tract, we have got milder infections which resolves with a 1 course of antibiotic. It's not a big issue. But as sir said that somebody is suffering from recurrent UTI, these candidates may not be a good options to choose for.
And does it go with all the other diabetic drugs as all combinations?
Absolutely, you can use it. The data is now with the combination with pioglitazone, metformin. Now we have data with combining gliptins with insulin, so you can combine with anything.
Only DAPA can't be combined with pioglitazone because of regulatory authorities have clamped down because the bladder problems.
Yeah, there is no mechanistic reason behind that, but because when the DAPA trial was going on, at the same time pioglitazone and bladder cancer issue was there. So the regulatory authority has not allowed dapagliflozin to do a trial with pioglitazone. But then with the KENA and there is IMPA, we have got this study. Yeah.
Thank
you. You said these medications don't cause any electrolyte imbalances. But in older patients already on 2 or 3 OHAs with comorbid conditions like hypertension and coronary artery disease, we find hyponatremia very commonly, maybe 124 to 130 range. Is it safe to start them on SGLT, or would you choose to wait or start on some other medication?
Yeah, very nice question. So ideally, if somebody is too elderly, more than 75 years, this drug may not suit, good for them. I mean, there is no rocket science to understand that. Those who are elderly, these molecules are not a safe drug. Simple.
So how specific
Actually, this drug does not increase the glucose utilization of the muscles.
No. Indirectly, yes. Directly, no.
So we must combine with other drugs. Compulsorily, we have to combine with other drugs.
Yeah, I mean, if you add with insulin sensitizers, then you have got a much better effect.
So how specific do you think are they to SGLT2? Because some of the SGLT1 is present in the cardiac muscles also. And we are concerned about the cardiac safety of most of these drugs. So how far is...
Yeah. So, see, this is, interesting paradox in SGLT2 science. Initially, when the drug was discovered, we thought that we should have a specific SGLT2 inhibitor. But then, now we have got some, drugs which are combined SGLT1 and T2 inhibitor, which is now in the phase 3 trial now. And they are doing even they have got a better robust glucose reduction compared to a selective SGLT2 inhibitor. So from the safety aspect, yes, you might ask me that we wanted for a specific SGLT2 inhibitor, but then if you have got a combined SGLT2 and SGLT1 inhibitor, you have probably a better efficacy. Now what happens to the safety is a big issue we need to know about in detail. We don't have any data.
When you have a combined SGLT1 and SGLT2, is there any problem in GI absorption of glucose?
Yeah, so what was suggested with LX4211, which is a combined SGLT1, SGLT2 inhibitor, if you give a combined inhibitor, this SGLT1 is available in intestine. So immediately, moment you give it, it will inhibit the absorption of glucose in the intestine through SGLT1 receptor. So the SGLT2 the glucose reaching into the kidney remains lesser with a combined SGLT1 and SGLT2 inhibitor. So you have got one indirect GLP1 mediated effect from the SGLT1 in the intestine as well as SGLT2 inhibitor. So theoretically, a combined inhibitor may have little bit of better efficacy, but the biggest issue is about the safety, as you asked, because SGLT1 is available in the cardiomyocyte. What will happen? We need to know about the trials in detail, cardiovascular trial in particular.
So obviously this is a clinically induced polyuria, right? Osmotic diuresis, that's what we are doing. So I think definitely in obstructive uropathy must be a contraindication for this, right? The use of this drug. So especially because I was referring to ma'am's question, usage in the elderly. So with a benign hypertrophy of the prostate and things like that, they must be definitely having a lot of nocturia in these people. So that itself must be a contraindication for this. But what about obstructive uropathy? Is this a contraindication of the use of?
PI has not mentioned prescribing informations for this DPP, SGLT2 inhibitor, has not mentioned about obstructive uropathy as a contraindication, but they are mentioning that it should be cautioned in patients with obstructive uropathy because of the reason you mentioned.
And definitely elderly, but
definitely elderly. Definitely.
As you said, this patient has got benign hypertrophy of prostate, nocturia, and as it is, he has got this problem. I don't think anybody would like to use this drug. It is very correct. Some questions what you asked, we can find the answer here. The question was renal function, and this is a published one in 2013, that's why I'm showing you this. Efficacy of SGLT2 inhibitors depend on the renal function, which all of us know, and in phase 3 studies, in phase 3 studies, as you can see, patient with moderate renal impairment, 252, the safety tolerability profile of DAPA was generally similar to others. As per European label, DAPA is not recommended for use in patients with moderate to severe renal impairment, where you see the creatinine, eGFR is less than 60. And monitoring renal function is recommended as per this prior to initiation of dapagliflozin at least yearly and thereafter, and prior to initiation of concomitant medicinal products that may reduce renal functions, and periodically thereafter. And for renal function approaching moderate renal impairment, at least 2 to 4 times. If renal function falls below the 60 ml creatinine clearance or eGFR below 60, then dapagliflozin should be discontinued. These are the guidelines which are very clear. So I think as there is a progression, does not matter what the threshold, it is safer. And as you said rightly, if a patient has nocturnal lesion, he is going to be worse with that. If somebody is getting up 3 times to pass in, you give this drug, and it will be worse also. Elderly patients have already this problem, whether it is nocturnal polyuria or not. As it is, they find it is inconvenient. Maybe the drug is add to that. But the safety of it has been proved. So it's a one where it has been proved in all these things. And what I wanted to show is somebody asked a question with other. You have got monotherapy and 558 patient, low dose 282, add on to oral metformin, sulfonylurea, glitazone, even DPP4 inhibitors as such. Add on to insulin, 807 patients. Comparators, there is head-to-head comparison of metformin versus sulfonylurea, and you have a dapagliflozin with metformin, 10 mg with metformin. These are all the studies which are available, and this is what even looking at safety about the moderate impairment of renal function, about the osteoporosis, cardiovascular risk, hypertension. Whatever it is, like the gliptins, studies are going on. Whatever you may say, these are subset analysis. And we have seen already in saxagliptin, alogliptin, now even the sitagliptin also. And which was not there in subset analysis. What does it show? Hazard ratio is 1.4 for cardiovascular heart failure with the saxagliptin, alogliptin. Now the sitagliptin has shown 86% increased risk of hospitalization to congestive heart failure. All of us have been doing it, but only now it has come, we don't know what will happen to the drug as such. And I feel if a patient has congestive heart failure, as a clinician, I will not touch gliptins as it is. We don't know what is the mechanism. Are there any receptors there? Nobody knows. And I have looked into all the literature, nobody else. Some people may say chance. It cannot be chance with saxagliptin, alogliptin. I have done studies for it. It cannot be chance for sitagliptin. At this point, it is safe not to use it in congestive heart failure at all. And maybe a day will come, it may be not as safe as drug to use in congestive heart failure, or new patients also may. People have done analysis, baseline, NBT PABA, whether they are on ACE inhibitors, all the parameters, 4,000 placebo and 4,000 saxa has shown there is no difference between the group. It is not a matter of chance. All right, one drug chance, second drug chance, now sitagliptin also. So even these drugs, if you ask a question today, are they 100% cardiovascular safe? We have no data. We have to wait probably 5 years. 5 years from then you can say yes, it is safe or unsafe. Till that time, we may use the drug, but only studies are going on for all these 3 molecules. Maybe 2018 or 19 we can say yes, they are safe or not safe. Just like the gliptins we have been using by left, right and center, we still have to wait for some time about the safety. So this is where all these studies have shown. Any other question?
So I think nowadays we are speaking more and more about pleiotropic effect of any drug, any molecule we have, we are speaking more and more of pleiotropic effect. Does these SGLT2 inhibitors have any pleiotropic effect which could be extrapolated as a clinical advantage?
Well, if you're talking about benefits beyond glycemic control.
That's it, exactly.
As pointed out by Professor Prasanna Kumar, he's shown that these drugs cause weight loss, reduction in blood pressure. So those would be ancillary benefits of the SGLT2 inhibitors. So if you have a patient who is overweight, someone who is hypertensive, you could use the drug in addition to getting glycemic benefits, the patient would lose weight. And it's not weight neutral like the gliptins, but causes significant weight loss. So you could think of those added benefits when you're choosing this particular molecule.
Yes.
We have sent a paper of 343 patients, I don't want to name, one of the SGLT2 inhibitors. These are all Indian patients, done in 16 centers in India, which has gone to West Pacific region, Singapore IDF meeting. And this data showed there are three groups: placebo, 100 milligram, 300 milligram for SGLT2. 100 milligram weight reduction was 1.9 kg, 300 milligram weight reduction was 2.9 kg. So you can say 2 to 3 kg weight loss in all these patients and an average as such. Again, if you see HbA1c reduction with monotherapy, it was 0.98. The best of the gliptins, it is 0.5 to 0.7. If some of you have read NEJM last year, there's a beautiful this one, that a lady of 54-year-old, diabetes is not controlled on metformin, what second drug you will see? One author argued that I will give SGLT2 inhibitors, other argued I will put her on this GLP-1 analog, or I think DPP-4 inhibitor. So if you read that discussion, without any bias, both the speakers or authors have discussed what is the advantage, disadvantage in each. Ultimately, for us, whatever we may talk 1 hour, and none of you have used this drug. In clinical research I have used, but it doesn't make any sense because they are blinded. I don't know whether my patient is on placebo or on the drug. Only when you start using the drug, like we have 2-3 years of experience in gliptin, then you will know about it. And one more paper, yesterday there was an invitation. These 343 patients, we had to see Indian patient, what are all the side effects with these SGLT2? That may be unique to India, worse than general population or less than that. When you do that subset analysis published 6 months from now, for many of these questions, what exactly happens in India, this may be a problem. We will have answers for these things.
I think next to GI concern and cardiovascular safety of any drug, another thing which we are mostly concerned is the malignant potential, especially after this bladder cancer with glitazones. So is there anything to tell about this?
There was initial, some reports of this bladder and breast cancer associated with the dapagliflozin, but then it was not, quantified exactly whether it is related with the dapagliflozin or it is because of a chance association. But then, the trials are going on. The DSMB, Data Safety Monitoring Board, are looking into all this. We don't have, current evidence, to say whether it causes cancer, it aggravates cancer, or it doesn't cause cancer. We need to wait upon that. These are probably, we are in a too early a stage about SGLT2 inhibitor. This drug looks very sound. If you see with the comparison with the gliptins, we have 4 head-to-head trials with gliptins. Direct head-to-head trial of SGLT2 inhibitor versus gliptins. In 3 head-to-head trial, both were equal. But in one trial, when you increase the dose of canagliflozin to 300 milligram, it was superior to the gliptins. So this the drug looks promising, but we need to wait for larger data.
Just before conclusion, I would like to ask Dr. Prasanna Kumar, so what do you think would be the fate of this SGLT2? What would be the...
If you are, because I have used all, I have done clinical trial for all the gliptins, for all the 3 SGLT2. That apart, if you see today, SGLT2 inhibitors will also have a place among the 9 second one, but you have to choose the second line. First line is already fixed, whether it is gliptins or basal insulins, whether they are SGLT2 inhibitors or sulfonylurea, whatever it is. I think among the 9, it will also have a place. Ultimately, I feel when you have metformin, then you have got gliptin, then you have got SGLT2. When you start using after 2-3 years, you yourself, not the guidelines, somebody sits somewhere and writes, you will have in your mind the guidelines. In this patient, I will choose gliptin. In the other patient, I will choose SGLT2, depending on weight or symptoms or age or duration, whatever it is. So then you will have a place algorithm very clearly. When do you choose SGLT2 compared to gliptins? And that is what you will see. I am not surprised. With the addition, what is said head to head, I want comparison of metformin, DPP4 plus SGLT2. Then you will reach a stage, probably insulin will take much longer time to be introduced rather than anything. And in this, what I told you, 14 years data, they concluded if you can avoid insulin as long as possible, it is better because the hazard ratio is 4.2 or something like that. On one hand, they are shouting early insulinization. On the other hand, what we are all practicing and what patient is begging for, try to avoid insulin first. So every drug armamentarium will be addition. It is a supplementation. It is not a substitute to any of the 9 drugs that we have got. We will use all those drugs and it will be one more armamentarium which will probably help you postponing insulin therapy. That is where I position the SGLT2 in future.
Thank you, Dr. Prasanna Kumar. Are there any other questions from the audience? I think if there are no other questions, we'll wind up this session. Thank you.